Do you love books? Do you wish you could hear some insights straight from the author themselves? Join Sam Hankin, your host, as he interviews top-selling book authors and dives into interesting and unforgettable discussions here at The Avid Reader.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Paul Hawken, author of Carbon, the Book of Life, published by Viking, and it was released on March 14th. Paul is the author of many bestsellers, some of which deal with the topics we'll be discussing today, including regeneration and drawdown, two of his books. Other titles include Blessed Unrest, Natural Capitalism, and his work has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, just to name a few. So, life on Earth would not exist but for hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, oxygen, and last, but most important, most crucial, carbon. Because carbon is the friendliest, most inviting element and will bond with almost anyone. It's bonded with us for the entire life of our planet and will do so for its remainder. But for some reason, unknown to me, mankind has chosen to treat it very unkindly. It's maligned as the driver of climate change and scorned as an errant element, blamed for the possible demise of all civilization. And as we head, remember I'm a fatalist, as we head for what is more and more likely a sixth extinction event, but the first caused by man in this Anthropocene epoch, as we proceed down this road to hell paved with sometimes less than good intentions, mankind has casually and without thought eliminated millions of species, destroyed a good portion of the Earth's habitat. And I will say that we didn't intend these consequences, including, most importantly, climate change. I will say that if we followed some of the blueprints that Paul has drawn up for us over the years, we would be in a lot better shape than we are now. So welcome, Paul. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I wish I could have written that, but I mean, yeah.
I still have a few of the words. I still have a few of the words from you.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, as you know, I'm a bookseller, and as a bookseller, notwithstanding the cliche, everyone who comes to my bookstore does judge a book by its cover, and yours is an excellent one. Maybe I don't know if you have a book handy. I only have the galley, so
Yeah, I do actually. This is the cover, and as a bookseller, let's talk about it because my publisher came up with a bunch of covers and they're awful. And I feel like what's going on in publishing is they're trying to get attention from somebody because you're in a bookstore, boom, 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 boom. And then you pick up a cover. Why? Well, the title, the way it's laid out, maybe all that sort of things. And the stuff they came up with was so gimmicky and it didn't cohere with the content. And so I have in my contracts, which goes way back with Penguin, I have cover approval. So if I don't like it, it doesn't, I design Blessed Unrest cover, I design, so forth.
And many authors don't get that.
I know. And so anyway, that photograph is from a friend Chris Jordan, amazing photographer. And I just love that image for a lot of reasons.
Me too.
And I wanted something that just gave a different feeling to the reader, about the content, what was inside, something about, wonder, the light beam coming in on that fir forest, and the tree that's curved, which comes from heavy snow, at certain times of the, well, in the winter, but, at certain times in the tree's development, and just the beauty of the relationship. And people love the cover. It's amazing. Even the publisher loves the cover. So
it's so tranquil. And there's so many books. I think there was one called Last Chance to See. And there was another book, John Fowles had a cover that was trees. And when people, for some reason, they gravitate towards that. And I'm looking out the window now at the trees that don't have their leaves, but are just as beautiful. And it's just as fractalized as they would be either way. So yeah, I think the cover's excellent. I think it'll be on our front table, has been on our front table. And the other thing that people are interested in the bookshop, and as am I, is most nonfiction books that I interview have a subtitle. And there's always a colon. And this is Carbon: The Book of Life. And at first I was saying, okay, I'm going to be interviewing this author about carbon, the element. We're going to talk about the scientific basis, how it's not that much in the universe, but everywhere here. We're going to talk about its scientific properties. And then I thought when I started, no, this doesn't seem to be where this book is going. And I thought, well, wait a minute, what am I reading? And it took a while for me to understand, which made it so much more evanescent and evocative, because it took me a while to realize, no, this isn't really a science book. And so then I began to understand the subtitle, which I'm talking too much about, but you tell me a little bit about why it's called The Book of Life.
Sure. I mean, as you mentioned in the introduction, carbon has been objectified and sort of singled out as the bad boy, a culprit, in civilization's march to self-termination. And and that somehow we have to combat, fight, and tackle the climate crisis, and that we have to decarbonize and carbon neutrality and all these things. And with due respect, to the people who say that and the scientists and so forth, that doesn't mean a damn thing to 99.9% of people on the earth. What does decarbonize mean? Well, the meaning is to, actually have an energy source that isn't, emitting carbon into the atmosphere. Of course, we get that, but you get it, I get it. But that is not what the world gets. And so the climate narrative, the narrative around what's happening, has been a narrative of objectification, of making carbon an object, and that's something we need to fix, we need to change, we need to go at it, and then people are made guilty because of their carbon footprint, which was invented by BHP, an oil company, actually to shift the responsibility for fossil fuels to the individual user. That was done, I think, was it 2009? I don't know what it was, 10, 12, 15 years ago. Clever guys. And so carbon actually is a flow of life. It is the flow of life. Our life, every life you see, every tree you're looking outside the window, every pollinator, every insect, every microbe. The flow of carbon is what we need to pay attention to. And that is a very different view of the world and our participation and our integration into it, as opposed to objectification of it. And objectifying the living world is the thinking that got us into this situation. That's what's the cause of global warming. That's the cause of the moving towards the sixth extinction. That's the cause of the collapse of biodiversity in the world today.
Well, there's so many things. I mean, eventually we'll get to fungi, which is such a big part of the book. And then I go, wait a minute, what does this have to do with carbon? And then I had to go back and think again how you were connecting the two. But let me go back to, say, Buckminster Fuller, when he did the analogy, and Carl Sagan too, about us being on spaceship Earth. Basically, we're all part of the crew, all life forms. And in order to travel safely to whatever destination we may be going, which is, again, evocative in your book, we need to take care of the ship. We need to use our resources wisely. We don't want to throw trash on the floor. We need to keep the place clean and respect our fellow crewmates. So basically, this book, in addition to a lot of other things, is you're telling us what we're doing wrong in that scenario.
Well, I think we all know that. I mean, the other element about
do we all know that?
Yeah, I think the other thing about spaceship analogy is don't touch the thermostat.
You're right, exactly. I forgot that one.
By the way, leave it alone. Well, the analogy of spaceship Earth is just really, which is Carl Sagan and Buckminster Fuller, was simply that we're passengers and wow, the food's good and everybody flies in the same class and and we're doing really well. And thank you very much. And so don't mess it up, and that's called the Earth. And so that's what's happened. I think that that analogy though does and that you question about waste, people, they do know it, we know it, when we throw things away, I mean, or don't have enough, and then actually people looking to ways to get things. There's waste pickers all over the world, who go through landfill and dumps and, beaches and try to find things that they need, whether it's clothing or whether it's something they can resell, or gathering plastic that's recyclable or something like that. So waste, the metabolic waste of this civilization of today is extraordinary. But I think beyond that, what that teaches us, the spaceship analogy, is that we're all connected and our lives depend on everybody else on the spaceship. And we may not see that for sure. We may not detect that. We may not be aware of that. That is understandable, of course, because the Earth is so big. But that is, in fact, true. And so, I mean, part of Carbon, the Book of Life, is to make that connection, but not using, I brought up Catholic, not using guilt, not using blame, not, pointing fingers at people, not using words that make people feel worse, or threatened, but actually to open it up like a curtain and say, like, wow, do you have any idea of the miraculous, extraordinary qualities of this planet and the creatures and the species, and it fills you full of awe and wonder, and it's so jaw dropping kind of science. This is science now, not anecdotes or not poetry, about where we live. And honestly, I mean, I don't think we know where we live, with all due respect, and literally, because we have a geography, the coordinates, the names, the forests and so forth. I don't think human beings know where they live. And I think that indigenous people, Native Americans, so forth, had a better sense of where they live because their entire existence depended on knowing where they live, how it worked, their relationship to it, making sure they didn't do anything that threatened generations in the future. And we don't know that.
It's funny. I was thinking about that today after reading your book on the plane a couple of days ago, because last night was the lunar eclipse.
Yeah.
And my daughter and I were up at 2:36 in the morning to watch it. And I was thinking, I wonder who's watching, how many people are watching this? And I recognized how indigenous people must have thought about events like that. And then I realized anyone who is watching it on the internet. They're not going outside and simply tilting their heads backwards.
Right. Yeah, I mean, at times we live near a mountain, and the eclipse is coming, and then I go up there. I know the mountain pretty well, and there's little paths and things that nobody's at it during the night and so forth, and then just sitting there and lying down to look up, and then watching the moon, disappear and the shadows changing, because the moon is moving at the same time, it's not stationary, and the shadows moving from the trees where I'm and so forth, it is like, I mean, it's such a fantastic experience, the color of the moon getting, carmine and reddish and, all that sort of stuff, and seeing the corona of the sun. I mean, these are things that actually locate you on the planet. I'm not laughing in a mocking way. I'm just saying, whoa, and everything we have, everything we eat, every single molecule of the life that informs us, that feeds us, that we enjoy, comes from those photons in the sun. Every single bit. There's no exception to that.
Yeah, that's probably the keynote of the book itself, is what we in school would just call photosynthesis, but that cycle itself. And one of the things that struck me about the book throughout was how poetic it was, which is why I went back to the Book of Life, which almost sounds fabulistic. But one of the things that made it poetic was the way that it seems like, just tripping off your tongue, you have all these lists of plants and animals, and it's just as if you know them all so well. And reading those lists was just a pleasure. Were you sitting there compiling them by looking at books, or do you just know them all?
Well, some I know for sure, and some certain descriptions and facts came from other writers. I read avidly. I'm an avid reader, so I mean, I love the name of your podcast. It's like, well, that's me, and I depend on people who are wiser, smarter, and more amazing than I am, for content, for my books, or for my writing. Absolutely. I feel like facts do not change people. Stories do. But I tell stories, and if the stories don't have 2 feet on the ground, that is, they're not factual, then that's just BS. I'm sorry. It's just bullshit. And so I make sure that, the data are there, that the facts are there, that the science is there. So it goes both ways. When I talk about, like, there's that thing about the rice, a single grain of rye, a rye seed, and that a scientist, gosh, I don't know what kind of science I can't remember. But anyway, he wanted to know how many roots it had. And then he put it in an electron microscope and studied it. It came up with 14 million roots, one seed, that big grain of rye. You go, what do you mean 14 million roots? Well, it goes beyond that. 14 million roots, and they have hyphae on them, which is a little connecting mechanism to mycelia, which is obviously in the soil and fungi. And then they are transacting. The roots are giving carbon, that is glucose, carbohydrates, sugar, to the mycelia and to the bacteria. And the mycelia, in turn, are negotiating with the plant to see what it needs: nitrogen, phosphorus, maybe something arcane like selenium or zinc. Who knows? The plant is telling the mycelia what it needs. The mycelia is finding it and transacting and exchanging it for that. Now, imagine one seed having that going on. And what we know about mycelia now is that it clicks. They're sending signals, the clicking sounds, just like the San people in Botswana or sperm whales. It's a clicking sound. And so there's a scientist, Adam Adamatsky at the Royal Society in London, who's been recording this for years, and he's seeing he has pattern recognition. Like, wait a minute, there are series of clicks that repeat themselves again and again and again. Now there is series of click. Well, he calls those words, and he said there's series where there's different words and they're comprising a sentence. And of course, other mycologists just throw their book at him. They don't agree, but that's all right. But he's registering something's going on down there in terms of communication. And you can see from Toby Keir's work in Amsterdam, who has lit up the mycelia so we can actually see what's going on. What you see is nutrients going two directions in the same 3 or 4 cell thick mycelia, which is impossible for us to see. And they're going both ways. Well, who's sending them? What's being sent? What's the communication? What's the messaging? What's the relationship to this rye seed and every other root, of course, in the world, and the knowledge that there's more life underneath the ground than there is above the ground on Earth? And so that's what I mean by we don't know where we live. I don't know what that means. I'm not interpreting it. I'm just describing what is known. And that's like, so you look outside, I can right now at the forest, and everything is like, what's going on there? I live here. This is a miracle. This is not just a plant, So I think those things come from the science, the reading, I wish I had a bookstore like yours near me. We don't, they're closed. But and a bookstore owner. But the fact is that in my own life, though, I mean, because I was involved with natural foods and a fairly big natural food company in the United States and so forth. And so I became very familiar with plants and farmers and so-called weeds, which I would love to talk more about. But, plants we think are no good, that bother us, that we take out, that we pull out. And so I became very familiar with that, working with farmers, creating regenerative agricultural systems in 35 different states for my company. And I learned a lot from just listening, meeting these farmers. They know so much. They've been on the land for decades, in some cases, generations. And they are founts of knowledge and insight that you can't get from a book.
One of the things that you talked about when you talk about this interconnectedness and you talk about consciousness, allude to the possibility that there's a certain base consciousness in every living thing. And I've interviewed a lot of panpsychists who suggest that even electrons might have a base consciousness. And it's a cliche-ish, but it reminded me a lot of Avatar and the planet Pandora and the home tree. And I started thinking about it. It actually makes a lot more sense than some of the stories we tell ourselves. It makes much more sense to look at the Earth as one gigantic living organism that has a consciousness and a path towards which it's going. And you're right. You can say, well, the scientists disagree, or it's not science, or the scientists will throw their book at you. But at the same time, it does make a great deal of sense that consciousness exists throughout the universe, in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I called the last chapter Conscious. I don't go
Right.
into that. There's a beautiful book by, forgetting the author right now, called Conscious. Conscious, yeah, and I read that, and not obviously, but the fact is nobody agrees as to what it is. First of all, there's no agreement as to what consciousness is,
None at all.
and how could there be? Because really, the Western scientific tradition from the Enlightenment actually is about naming, and naming is about separation, distinctions. You can't have a name unless it's different than something else. That's the whole purpose of naming. And then you study that. Well, consciousness doesn't lend itself to that. It's not a thing. And so in the native traditions, Native American and indigenous traditions, other cultures that are non-Western, not based on scientific enlightenment, the so-called enlightenment, their perception is verbal. I mean, it's about verbs, it's about relationships as opposed to dissection or separation. And so they see, and I shouldn't talk about them, they as a they, but I mean, those cultures depended on understanding the relationship to where they were, as opposed to be able to name everything and dissect it and break it up and all that sort of stuff. And so those are emerging, those two ways of seeing the world emerging today. And I say that right in the first chapter. And you're seeing traditional ecological knowledge, or native knowledge and wisdom merging with a whole new wave of science, and it's incorporating, learning from each other, working together to describe the world as it maybe really is, as opposed to how we've dissected it. And it's quite beautiful, the science is coming out of that, and the observations. You see that in Robin Wall Kimmerer, of course, who is a scientist, and but you see it in many other places too.
It's interesting you use language because, a lot of your book is kind of like bringing consciousness to like this lingua franca where the mycelia are making clicks. They're talking to each other. They're talking around the entire world, and perhaps one gigantic switchboard in which everybody is talking to everybody else, and we've just forgotten how to listen.
Yeah.
But, and I want to make sure people who are listening to this recognize that we are talking about carbon, and that you and I are talking like poetry here. So I was thinking, what question can I ask that actually brings this book back to what you're really talking about? And I thought about when you talk about picking up a scoop of earth versus going out to a corporate farm and picking up what appears to be earth and isn't. That's what the guts, if you will, of the book talk about that. So tell our listeners, okay, and viewers, what's the difference between going outside your house, picking up a scoop of earth, and going out to some farm that's growing high fructose corn syrup?
Right. You're right, though, about somebody's had a PDF of the book, a podcaster didn't have the book, and they did command find to see how many times carbon, the word, was in the book. And that's actually it's not very often.
It's just in the title.
Well, no, I talk about carbon. Chapter 2 is all about carbon. It's really, and so is chapter 3, very much about carbon. But the point of that is that I'm trying not to focus just on carbon. The difference between soils is remarkable. And what we know from bioacoustics now is that I say that soil is an organism. It's not a medium in which things live or don't live. It's actually an organism itself. We have 40 trillion microbes that surround us, in us, on us, through us, without which we would die immediately. But we don't call them human beings. Okay, we breathe in viruses, we breathe in DNA, we breathe in microbes every time we inhale, without exception, no matter where you are. And so we are part of a system. And where does our organism begin? And that's a really good question. And the same with soil, it is an organism. And so if you put probes down there, very sensitive probes, and you put it into, say, soils that have never been farmed, never been disturbed, if you will. And you hear these amazing sounds that come out of it. And yes, some of them are the creatures, the worms, this, that, but it's a larger acoustic framework. And if you take that same probe and you go to Iowa, or Nebraska, or these corn soy farms that have been chemicalized and sprayed and glyphosated and, for decades, and you put the probe down there, it's absolutely dead silent. And there's not a sound that comes out of that soil because it's dead. And it's important to understand that all life comes from the soil, from the earth, okay? I mean, on land. And and we forget that, and we kind of did a shortcut in it starting in the 20s and 30s, where we put the macronutrients that plants need right on the top of the soil called NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And the plants loved it, just like people love junk food, right? You get fat, you get sugar, you get protein, and it's called ultra processed food. So we have ultra processed agriculture, right? And so the roots don't go down. And we are feeding the plant, okay? Everybody thought this was a huge breakthrough in human civilization. It was not a breakthrough, it's a breakdown. Because the only way you create a healthy plant is to actually feed the soil. You feed the soil makes the plant. And that is the difference between chemical agriculture and regenerative agriculture or traditional agricultural methods. And those plants where the soil is healthy have macronutrients for sure, but they have minerals. And there's 10,000 different ingredients in a chard. 10,000 ingredients, we measure 17, there's 10,000 more ingredients, say, in kale. And there's only a 10% overlap between the two. We don't know even what we're eating or what's missing, from these plants, because we have just pursued this, chemical industrial type of agriculture for so long that we don't know. But even the USDA used to measure the mineral content and the vitamin content of fruits and vegetables and so forth and publish it, and then this is how much you should have, and this is the nutrients you need, blah, 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 blah. In 1954, they redid their study. No, it was 1984, excuse me. They redid their analysis, and it was so low, it was so bad, they canceled it. In other words, so the data we're getting from the USDA, and if I guess the FDA too, maybe, I don't know, but it's absolutely ancient and wrong. So it's a living medium. And that's why there's, 7,000 some odd cultures that, ethnographers have identified on Earth and been here. Every single one of those cultures called the Earth Mother Earth. Not one single culture said Father Earth. And they knew that life came from their mother, it's madre. So, and it came from soil. It came from the earth.
When you talk about, you tell us about the family in Western Australia with the 35,000 acres in the wild, and the family who recreated the wild, is it in the United Kingdom, and hedgerows. The problem I have with that, it's like so wonderful an idea and so wonderful a way of thinking about how things could be. But look, you and I have had so many more yesterdays than we do tomorrow. We have a short horizon, you and I. So, and look at our government. We're going exactly the opposite. It was bad enough, but now we're going exactly the opposite of the bad, worse than the bad enough. So right. So when you write this book, it sounds like, okay, yeah, let's get together and do this. We can fix all this. And some of your blurbs go, the most optimistic and hopeful book I've read from famous actors like Jeff Bridges, and I forget who else blurbed the book, but.
Well, I mean, only one actor. All the rest of them are scholars, scientists.
Yeah, I know, but I was thinking just people that I know the names of.
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to make is, what the hell are we supposed to do? That's the point. What exactly is it you think is going to happen? Because as I said in the introduction, I'm fatalist about these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wake up every morning and look at the news too, so I'm watching it and I feel despair and just I'm gobsmacked by what people say, how the fact that lying now has become okay. It's not just lying. It's like, it's a tool. It's called the power lie, by the way. And it demonstrates when Trump emits lie after lie. I can't remember when he's told the truth. Lie after lie after lie. It's actually a way of signaling dominance. I can say what the heck I want, and it is so. And that means that he doesn't care about the truth. Okay, so this is a new regime and on Earth in terms of the breakdown of civilization, of civility, of what it means to be a human community, and of course that's happening. And people worry about the sixth extinction. I'm not, because we'll be gone before that happens. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying that I take take it.
The most powerful sentence in your book is that if all the plants go away, we'll be gone in a few days.
Pollinators.
Away, the earth will be.
Pollinators. If the pollinators get down to 3-4%, that's E.O.
Right.
Wilson from Harvard.
But if we go away, the earth would be so happy.
Oh yeah, the earth come right back, and so we need a rapprochement between ourselves and the living world. No question about sorry, we got it wrong. What can we do about it? I mean, I don't know what to do. Okay, now I think looking to people, I mean, Bill McKibben is one of the people who, actually wrote a really beautiful blurb for the book, endlessly fascinating, and I think that the climate narrative for decades, because I learned about it a long time ago at Stanford Research Institute, has been about fear, existential threat, about reduce, about less, about, it's all the kind of things that human beings do not gravitate towards. And I'm not saying the science wasn't correct. I'm just saying is the wording, the narrative, was like, let's watch, see if that works. It didn't work. So we have basically a polity in this country, but all over the world, that's actually manifestly ignorant about what's going on, because the way it's been communicated, the narrative isn't one that actually satisfies and draws people in. And so that's why when Bill wrote the thing endlessly fascinating, that's why I'm trying to take the narrative. It doesn't, sort of whistle past the graveyard of what's going on right now, not at all. But it does open up to the vista of what is possible and where we live, and then what our role can be in an entirely different way, instead of fighting and fixing, which are very male verbs, by the way. And those haven't worked. That rhetoric hasn't worked. And Extinction Rebellion, great, but really, can we have a different word for what we want to do? Can we have a different name of who we are as community, as people? I just went to town today to get something from the local store and so forth. What I noticed, everybody said, good morning, hello, good morning. There was that's human beings. That's who we are. The guy unloading the produce truck, oh, good morning. He didn't know me. I didn't know him. Never seen each other before. It was just like kindness. And the core quality of human beings is connection, compassion, kindness, forgiveness. That's the core quality. Can we live in a society where political leaders and capitalism and concentrations of money then draw out a very different being from us in terms of selfishness and fear? Yeah, we can. We've done it before.
I would like to think so.
Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about acknowledgement. It's like, even if you don't, if someone opens the door for you and you thank them, or if someone lets you in line and when you're driving and you raise your hand, they raise their hand.
Right.
Simple. That's like my mycelium. It's just basically.
It's human. It's being human.
Yeah. It's just, I acknowledge you exist. You acknowledge I exist, and it's okay. I like you. You me.
Right.
But what you were saying about the situation now is that when you're learning from someone like Roy Cohn, the 3 precepts of your life are attack, 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 which doesn't work. Nothing is true, which doesn't work. And when you lose, say that you won, which doesn't work. Right. But it can work in the very short term.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's Trump's tutor. And he learned it well from Ray Cohn and so forth. And so we are now the victims of that. And so we elected him.
Look, see, we're not now we're even more off topic than we were before. Here, I'll give you one that'll let you go back into actually talking about the book. One of the very interesting things, and actually it ties into all this because it shows how stupid we are, is when you talk about we're trying to build these carbon sequestration and aggregating plants, and you're talking about how it costs billions and billions and billions of dollars, yet you supply a method where this could be done in hours almost, and you could sequester much more carbon than this giant combine is going to be doing. Talk a little bit about how that works.
This goes back to what I said earlier about the climate narrative, because if you think of it, carbon as an object, a thing, And again, these male verbs you have to fix and, fight and combat and tackle, all those kind of sports and war metaphors to use around climate and carbon. Then you come up with tech solutions, and tech solutions are one of them is direct air capture. In other words, you know what? It's up there. We need to bring it back home. Okay. So what we're going to do is create these giant machines that suck the air. There's 4 parts per 10,000 of CO2 in the air. So you've got to suck a lot of air. Then you have to separate the C from the O2, the oxygen. And and then that C, that carbon, then it has to be what are you gonna do with it? Well, you're gonna liquefy it. Okay, now you've liquefied it, and now you're gonna pump it. What would you do with it? You got to pump it somewhere where it won't go back up in the air again. So you pump it into geological formations, and that's called carbon capture direct DAC. And there's a problem with that. And now the problem with that is, and I go to the second law of thermodynamics right now, which we kind of all know, which energy only goes one direction, doesn't go backwards. And when you burn something, you get ashes. That's called entropy. Energy leaves as its residue entropy when it's used. And so the CO2 in the atmosphere is entropy. It is what happens when we burn coal, gas, oil. We burn it. Up goes the CO2. Okay, so now we're creating a technology that is going to take that CO2 out of the atmosphere and put it into geological formations at great cost, by the way. It takes a lot of energy to do that. Well, that creates entropy. So now you're using entropy to fix entropy. That is a physical impossibility. That's like saying, I've got all these cow patties in the pasture. I'm going to make a new cow out of cow shit. You can't do that. It's not the way physics or biology works. But thus being sold to people as, and even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says, oh, if we don't, draw carbon out of the atmosphere, we're screwed. It's again like, are you guys, who are you? You say you're scientists, from even this is 9th grade physics, maybe 7th grade physics. This is not something you need to study for years and years to understand that it will never work. It will never work. And so, yeah, I do criticize direct air capture and other technologies. I'm not criticizing technology. So I want to make that clear. But when it's applied in a way that is fatuously and erroneously presented, to funders and organizations and governments and so forth, I'll criticize it.
It's really funny. There's some synchronicities in my life in your book, because I was reading it. I was in St. John, the Virgin Islands, and we were snorkeling, and the captain was talking about carbon, and he said, do you want to go snorkel in some mangrove swamps?
Oh, yeah.
And so we did, and it was like spooky. And it was like Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows.
Yeah, the roots and stuff. Yeah.
But then that goes back to your book. Talk a little bit about, okay, you got this giant plant machine that captures this stuff and does stupid things with it and uses up more energy than it's, than it's supposed to be helping us. But what could the mangroves do that machine is trying to do?
Yeah, mangroves sequester and hold carbon more than any other ecosystem on land, or actually ocean too. They're extraordinary. And of course, if you were skin diving or had a snorkel, you're going underneath and you're seeing this incredible root system, which you almost feel like you get lost in it.
It was very scary. I almost got caught. I said, what would happen if I got caught underneath this? And just as I said that, I realized, wait, I'm not coming to the top of the water, and I had to scoot to the side.
Exactly right. You couldn't find your way through the thicket back up to the surface, and so it's one of the most magnificent. It's where the sea meets the land, and you get this incredible growth, and of course you get marine life too. I mean, the number of creatures you see down there, happy creatures,
little tiny guys.
Yeah, crustaceans and fish and so forth, and this is what the Earth does if we don't screw it up, if we don't clear it to make a resort, and so There's examples of like that in the book too. Just like fungi being one of them. Just like 13.2 they did billion tons of carbon CO2 to the carbon CO2 is sequestered every year by fungus. That's
Yes, your
it's
numbers in the book are like Carl Sagan's old numbers.
yeah.
They're impossible. When you talk about what's in 1 cubic centimeter of soil,
Mm,
when you give me the numbers, I'm going, well, no, it's impossible. It's
yeah.
absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
20 kilometers inside of 1 cubic centimeter.
Yeah. A teaspoon. I know. And so again, why? I mean, we see the earth in macro terms, and we talk about that way. We don't see it in terms of the delicacy, the refinement of all the creatures, not just the big, charismatic creatures, not just the David Attenborough creatures, that we see sort of like, wow, but and so I'm trying to open that up, not to get into the sort of immerse into microbial life, but to actually get into the sense of getting wonder. And I just feel like when people experience that, like you did in the mangrove, now you might have had a moment of fear as well. But I mean, that's part of the wonder, which is like, oh my gosh, and but when you experience that, it changes you. It changes the way you see the world. It changes the way you see our activity, what we're doing and what we shouldn't be doing if we want to stay here, or at least as a species. And that changes you. That's the point is, and that's what I'm trying to point out. Like this, the book of life. Like, take a look. It is amazing. Do we know, like mother bats? They speak, they talk, they have their own lingo. It's called motherese by scientists. They don't know how to describe it differently from what the males are doing, and they name their young. Okay, and they tell their young to watch out for that bat and that bat, the male bats and so forth. And they're predatory. They do this and so forth. And we just like, and then if you take the ultrasonic sound, because we can't hear bats, of course, it's not in the audible range. If you take it and just slow it down, it is the most beautiful, beautiful sound you've ever heard. And it's not like any sound you've ever heard.
Listen
Like,
to it.
that's bats. And we're the only culture that demonizes bats. Every other culture in the world actually exalts them and praises them, and but does not demonize them as bad.
When you talk about other cultures in the book, and you do talk about indigenous cultures a great deal, and from when we were in grade school and beyond, you hear the stories about how when a tribe or a nation gets together, and you describe the process very well, and decides, okay, these are our strategic goals for ourselves. How will it affect the next generation, the seventh generation down, in each generation, in your book, in your mind, being 70 years. So that's gone completely. There's no such thing as planning for tomorrow. Most of the people we've been talking about in the United States government would not really care what would happen, because they would be dead at that time, and there would be no reason to care because they're dead.
Right.
And I don't know what I'm asking, other than the fact that I want you to help me figure out how this won't happen, and I don't know how you can do that.
Well, I feel like the Native American tradition, the idea that you make decisions about today, taking into mind the impact it'll have 7 generations from now. Now, 7 generations, I've been told by the Wampanoag and others, is actually 7 times 70. It's like virtually 500 years, which is a very interesting way of seeing the world. And I think from a culture that's been in place for thousands and thousands of years, there's gratitude, which is they wouldn't be able to harvest the fish and the chestnuts and all the different foods that they eat, right, had not people before them done the same thing, thought the same way, and thought about generations that they would never meet. and children they would never see. And like there's very strict protocols in Minnesota about how you harvest wild rice and what you don't harvest and how much you take and varies, and these are traditions that are passed on again for literally generations and so forth. Then and the fact is that in Native American cultures, I don't know all cultures, food was, I think it's true all the way around, Aboriginals and so forth, food was never sold. It was never commodity. It was never exchanged for a monetary equivalent. It was exchanged, traded, and shared, but it was never sold. It was the basis of life, and you didn't sell it. And so they had a different system of planning. And there's several times in the book, I think twice, I give the diet of a certain Onondaga, and the Miwok here in California, and the diet is stunning. It's so much more diverse than our diet in the United States now. We've really simplified the number of foods we eat, and it shows in the health records. And their diet was astounding. And so their thinking is when they harvested, they like lily bulbs. When the first, I don't know first, but Europeans, probably English, came to the Sacramento San Joaquin Valley in California, I mean, it was like a park. They called it like Hyde Park because it was these beautiful oak trees. They used fire ecology so it didn't become brush. There was grass everywhere, and around the trees were big lily gardens, really. I mean, lilies. They ate lilies, okay, the Native Americans. And so what they did is a lily bulb has three corms, and so they would harvest it. They would eat one, plant two, not eat two, plant one, eat one, plant two. And so the amount of lilies that kept expanding where they lived. And so that's when these English explorers like the name, came in, and it was so lush, so profuse, so abundant where they lived. And that's because they were always thinking ahead, not just for themselves, but for people they would never know and never meet and so forth in terms of their culture. And so that's regeneration. That is innate to all other, 8.4 species, a million species on Earth. That's what they do. That's what our cells do, by the way, every one of our cells. We're the only species that actually does the opposite. The only species. No other species does that.
Well, when you say that, and you were talking about diet, in the book, there's a coffee shop at the bookstore, and half the people who go there are lactose intolerant, so they want almond milk or oat milk, which aren't necessarily the best things they can have either, or people have asthma, or they have eczema, or they have psoriasis. There are so many things, but when we were kids, no one had these things. Talk about how what our diet today, where literally 80% of the products in the supermarkets do contain high fructose corn syrup. Talk about what our diet has done to us and our bodies and our minds.
Yeah, well, and in a macro sense, it's just deteriorated our health, of course. In a micro sense, we don't know, can't break it down how much did so and so eat, when, how. We do know that our food system is not a food system. Basically, it's an addiction system. And the scientists, there's scientists who study taste and study how to make food more addictive. They don't use that term, just that you want to eat it some more or more of it and so forth. And it's a science. And that science has been in place for 50 years, at least in the food industry. I heard about it at Stanford Research Institute in the 70s, okay? I mean, about what they were doing, and it's just, like I say, it's a science, if you can call it that. But what it did is make our food addictive. In other words, we want to eat more of it. We didn't want to eat more of it at the same time. We want to eat it every day. We want to, and those are called ultra processed foods. They're not just the plain food itself. They've been processed in such a way. And that processing has, lit up our taste buds and our desires in such a way that, we want more. and we get more, and it's cheap, of course, because it's not very good food, and doesn't really have all the ingredients food should have or has inherently. And so we have what, 70% of the people in the United States are obese or overweight, or chronically overweight. And we have the worst outcomes of 20 industrial nations in terms of human health. We spend more money per capita than any other industrial nation. $4.7 trillion a year on, I would call it a sick care system, because that's what it's addressing. It's not really creating health. And I'm not decrying what doctors and nurses are doing. They're amazing people. They're trying to take care of humans. I'm not criticizing, but the system itself doesn't go upstream. And there's that wonderful parable, that goes way back in different versions, but about whether it's children or people, but you're by the river and you're seeing people going down the river, rushing down the river, and they're sort of flailing around and going to drown. And you go in, you rescue those people, of course, and you keep rescuing them, And finally somebody says, let's go upstream and find out who's throwing them in the river. And so if we don't have a healthcare system that's going upstream, it's a sick care system, because you have to go upstream in order to understand cause. And we're always looking at cure, so-called, in quote marks, cure, but it's not cure. Look, we watch CNN one night. Look at the ads. Every ad is for a drug. It's for a drug for diseases. With all due respect to myself, I've never heard of that disease, but there must be enough people who have it that they play the ad.
If you have metastatic non-small cell, it'll extend your life 2.3 months,
right,
versus the placebo. The funny thing is, another situation where I was actually reading your book, was by the pool in St. John. There's a guy across the pool in a lounge chair, obese. He has a can of Pringles that he opens up, and I start watching him, and he takes one and he eats it. He puts his hand back in, takes one and eats it. Keeps doing that, doesn't seem to have a thought process involved. And then he throws the can underneath his chair because it's empty. And then my wife reminded me that Pringles potato chips are not potato chips at all.
No.
They are nothing like potato chips. They do have a saddle function, like a mathematical equation, but I was enjoying, is a perverse word to use in that context, but I was enjoying watching him because it reminded me of your book, because like I said, there was no actual thought process. It was just ingest, take another one, ingest, which goes directly to what you were saying about why was he doing it? What was he addicted to? What was it?
Yeah. And from as a Procter & Gamble, who makes Pringles? I forget, but whoever makes them, that's success.
It's got to be Kraft. I don't even know. It's got to be.
I don't know anymore, but I mean, that's success.
Yeah.
Like that's success. That's cataclysmic failure. That is, I say, and I'll say it again, that Pepsi, Coke, these companies that are selling, I call it non-foods, that are addictive, like Pepsi, Mountain Dew. Mountain Dew, it has more sugar and caffeine than any soft drink in the world.
Yep.
And it is so addictive to teenagers, because, well, caffeine, is really an excitant, and it's like having espresso all day long for a teenager. And
these kids who work for me, they drink those 5-hour energy drinks.
Yeah. But to me, these are committing crimes against humanity.
They are.
You can make a drink like that, but if you spend $5 billion a year using Beyonce and other heroic people that we know as a means to advertise to children that this is going to be, you're going to be glamorous, you're going to be a body, you're going to be famous, you're going to be this. I mean, all the things that are sort of, not that are implied by using, stars, that is a crime against humanity, because our children are paying a huge price for that. And you can't blame them for being addicted, because that's what's in front of them. And they want to feel a little bit better than they feel. And that's what caffeine does, I mean, it momentarily lights up the dopamine signals and all that sort of stuff. And so those companies know exactly what they're doing, and they benefit, they profit from it, they grow, and they're killing our children.
Well, we've already just stated that, the book is obviously not a panacea or a formula for how this can be stopped. But if you were, and you certainly seem to be an optimistic person, and when I'm selling this book in the store, which like I said, people are going to naturally gravitate to it. But if I'm selling and they ask me what it's about, and I say, yes, it's filled me with a lot of hope. Why? What's the message that you want your reader, as we conclude, what's the message that you want your reader to take away from this, given my mindset, oh, we're past the point of no return?
Well, I don't think we are past the point of no return, but
that's the difference between you and me. Why? How can you possibly say we are not past the point of no return?
Because we don't know what's going on. We don't know what's growing. We don't know what's emerging in the world, because all our media is based on lighting up our amygdala. And so the thing is, what's emerging. Look at the Conference of the Party. Obviously in Brazil this year, I guess, in Azerbaijan last year. Conference of the Parties in Colombia about biodiversity. The Conference of the Parties was in Dubai, I guess. About land. Okay, these occur every year, and all these people, and politicians, corporations, and NGOs get together in blue and green zones and so forth, and talk and try to come to some agreement, which is impossible, but they do, and it's always watered down and so forth. These are top-down solutions. The world, nature, this earth doesn't work that way. It's not top-down. I'm not saying it's bottom up either. It's a beautiful, complex, adaptive system, that is lateral. It's not top down. There's no top down solution that's going to work. And so we look at that failure and look at what's going on and go, oh my, we're screwed. Okay, not an unreasonable conclusion. Okay, what we don't see, and this is why I'm optimistic, is that there are people, communities everywhere in the world who are restoring life on Earth. Restored, RESTOR.ECO, from ETH, the university in Zurich, the Swiss university in Zurich, under Tom Crowther, has a website where you can see 250,000 sites and places on Earth where people are restoring life on Earth. We don't know about that, because each organization, each tribe, each one that does it, it doesn't make the news cycle. It doesn't light up our amygdala. It doesn't create click-throughs. And so it's ignored because it's small, and admittedly small. What is happening is that there is a culture emerging everywhere on the earth that is refining their understanding of who they are and what their relationship is to each other and to the living world, and acting on it as best they can where they are with the resources they have. And we don't see it, we don't know it. I do see it in part. No one can see it all. And I'm aware of these things. I'm back from my Blessed Unrest and then Regeneration and Dharma and so forth. So I'm aware of them in a way that most people aren't, because I choose to be not. But if you were just a regular person, so if there is such a thing, but I'm just, and looking at the information, the news that comes to you, you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't see it. It's not talked about. And so, yeah, I mean, but I see it in apocalyptic terms, and people say, is this apocalypse? And I go, yeah. But in the Greek meaning of the origin of the word, and it means apocalypse reveals what has been hidden, obscured. That's what an apocalypse is, and that is happening. And so again, I'm trying to give a little bit of a voice to that in Carbon, the Book of Life. But it's, a lot of people say the book is very hopeful. I wasn't trying to make people hopeful. I was trying to make them feel awe and wonder and connected, and and to feel the love that we all have for each other and all other species, whether it be dragonflies, or whether it be monkfish, or whether it be sperm whales, or whether it be pollinators. It doesn't matter. Wherever you can find your way in and wend around, the beautiful, beautiful system we call life is going to change your life.
I can't think of a more eloquent way of ending the interview than that. So thanks so much, Paul. Thanks for writing this and your other books. And it actually, even though I am a curmudgeon, it does actually give me hope. And it was a wonderful, wonderful, awe-inspiring book. And I really enjoyed reading it. And thank you so much.
Thank you. No, thank you for what you do. I depend on people like you, and I do really.
Well, you talked about addiction, and I'm addicted to books, and I think it's better than being addicted to Mountain Dew.
Exactly, no question about it. So anyway, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Avid Reader. If you liked today's episode, check out more of our content on our channel.